The cameras had just stopped rolling, but Charlie Sheen's hands were still shaking. What he'd just said on live television would become legendary. But nobody knew the real story behind those two words that changed everything. Tiger blood. It was March 2011, and Charlie had just wrapped what would become the most infamous interview of his career. The words, "I have tiger blood," had rolled off his tongue with such confidence that even he was surprised. But as the studio lights dimmed and the crew began packing up, Charlie found himself alone with a truth he couldn't share with anyone. The interviewer had asked him about his recent erratic behavior, his battles with addiction, his very public meltdown. Charlie's response had been pure theater, or so everyone thought. But what happened next, in the quiet moments after the cameras stopped rolling, revealed something far deeper than anyone could have imagined. As Charlie walked to his car that evening, his phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from friends who thought his tiger blood comment was brilliant PR spin. They praised his comeback strategy, his ability to control the narrative, his genius for turning controversy into catchphrases. But Charlie knew something they didn't. The truth was, he hadn't planned to say those words at all. 3 days before that interview, Charlie had been sitting in his Malibu home, staring at a letter he'd received from a fan. Not just any fan, a 12-year-old girl named Sarah who was battling leukemia. She'd written to tell him how much his show meant to her during her chemotherapy treatments, how his character's humor helped her laugh even on her worst days. "Dear Mr. Sheen," the letter began in careful handwriting. "My mom says I have the heart of a tiger because I never give up fighting. I wanted to tell you that you make me laugh when the medicine makes me feel sick. Thank you for being strong like a tiger too." Charlie had read that letter 17 times. Each time, the words hit him differently. Here was this brave little girl, facing something unimaginably difficult, and she was thanking him for being strong. Him, the man who felt like he was falling apart every single day. That night, Charlie had called his daughter. Not to talk about work or schedules or any of the usual surface-level conversations they'd been having lately. He wanted to tell her he loved her, that he was trying to be better, that he was fighting to become the father she deserved. "Dad, are you okay?" she'd asked, hearing something different in his voice. "I'm trying to be," he'd admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not strong enough for all of this." "You are strong, Dad. You have to be. You're like those tigers at the zoo. Even when they're scared, they look brave." Those words stayed with him through the next 2 days. When he walked into that interview, he wasn't planning to reference tigers at all. The interviewer had pushed him about his lifestyle, his choices, his ability to handle pressure. And suddenly, without thinking, Charlie found himself channeling that little girl's letter and his daughter's words. "I have tiger blood" wasn't a catchphrase or a publicity stunt. It was Charlie's way of trying to embody the strength that others saw in him, even when he couldn't see it in himself. But he could never tell anyone that story. How do you explain that your most famous quote came from a dying child's letter and your daughter's innocent wisdom? How do you admit that behind all the bravado was just a man trying to live up to the strength others believed he possessed? The aftermath of the interview was immediate and overwhelming. Tiger blood became a meme, a punchline, a cultural phenomenon. T-shirts, coffee mugs, internet jokes. Everyone wanted to be part of the Charlie Sheen tiger blood moment. But as the weeks went by and the phrase took on a life of its own, Charlie felt increasingly disconnected from what it had originally meant to him. Late at night, he would think about Sarah's letter, wondering how she was doing in her own battle. He'd donated anonymously to her medical fund, but he never contacted the family directly. He was afraid they might have seen the interview and thought he was mocking the very strength they'd inspired. His daughter called him a few weeks after the interview went viral. "Dad, everyone at school is talking about your tiger blood thing," she said. "It's kind of embarrassing, but also, I get it. You were trying to be strong like we talked about, weren't you?" Charlie's throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart. I was trying to be strong like you said." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you are. Even when you're being weird on TV, I can tell you're trying." That conversation meant more to Charlie than any positive review or career milestone ever could. His daughter understood, even if no one else did. Months later, Charlie received another letter. This one was from Sarah's mother. Sarah had passed away, but not before asking her mom to write one final letter to the tiger man who had made her laugh during her treatments. "Sarah wanted you to Know that she watched your interview and was so happy that you talked about tiger blood, the letter read. She told everyone in the hospital that you got the idea from her letter about being strong like tigers. She was so proud. Thank you for giving her that moment of joy in her final weeks. Charlie had to put the letter down and walk away. He stood on his balcony, looking out at the ocean. And for the first time in months, he cried, not from pain or frustration, but from a mixture of grief and gratitude that he couldn't quite name. The tiger blood phenomenon continued to follow him for years. Comedians made jokes, media outlets referenced it, and people would shout it at him on the street. But Charlie never corrected the narrative. He never explained the real story because doing so would have diminished what it represented: the strength of a dying child, the love of a daughter, and the possibility that even in our most broken moments, we might still be capable of inspiring others. Instead, he quietly established a foundation for pediatric cancer research, funding it with money he made from tiger blood merchandise licensing. He never publicized his involvement, never used it for PR purposes. It was his private way of honoring Sarah's memory and the accidental wisdom that had emerged from one of his darkest periods. Years later, when people asked Charlie about that infamous interview, he would just smile and say, "Sometimes the best things we do come from places we least expect." He never elaborated. But those close to him noticed that whenever he mentioned tiger blood, his expression would soften, as if he was remembering something sacred. The truth was that tiger blood had become more than a catchphrase for Charlie. It had become a reminder of his responsibility to live up to the strength others saw in him, even when he felt weak. It represented the unexpected ways that pain and hope intersect, how a child's courage can inspire an adult's resilience, and how sometimes our most public moments are really private conversations with the people who matter most. Charlie Sheen never told anyone the complete story behind his most famous quote. But every time someone mentioned tiger blood, he thought of Sarah, of his daughter, of the strange and beautiful ways that human connection can emerge from our most vulnerable moments. The real truth behind tiger blood wasn't about bravado or publicity stunts. It was about a man trying to embody the strength that others, particularly the youngest and most vulnerable, had seen in him all along. It was about discovering that sometimes our greatest moments of apparent madness are actually moments of profound clarity, where we finally understand what we're meant to be fighting for. And that truth, Charlie realized, was worth protecting. Some stories are too sacred to become headlines. Some moments are too precious to be turned into sound bites. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is let others create their own meaning while we hold on to the real one, keeping it close to our hearts like a secret that makes us stronger every day. The tiger blood legend would live on, but for Charlie, it would always be a reminder of the day a dying child's courage helped him find his own. But the story doesn't end there. What happened next would test everything Charlie thought he understood about strength, vulnerability, and the unexpected ways our most painful moments can become our greatest gifts. 6 months after Sarah's mother sent that final letter, Charlie received an invitation that would change his perspective forever. Sarah's hospital was hosting a memorial event for children they had lost, and they wanted Charlie to speak. Not as a celebrity, not as a publicity stunt, but as someone who had been touched by one of their patients in a profound way. Charlie's first instinct was to decline. How could he stand in front of grieving families and pretend to have wisdom about loss? How could he honor Sarah's memory without revealing the private truth behind his most public moment? But something in the hospital director's voice when she called convinced him to say yes. "Sarah's story has inspired our whole staff," Dr. Martinez explained during their phone conversation. "She talked constantly about her tiger heart and about how you understood what it meant to fight with courage, even when you're scared. The families here need to hear that their children's strength matters, that it ripples out into the world in ways they might never know." The night before the memorial service, Charlie sat in his hotel room, staring at the speech he'd written and rewritten dozens of times. Every version felt inadequate. How do you capture the impact a 12-year-old girl had on your life without making it about yourself? How do you express gratitude for a lesson learned at such a devastating cost? He thought about calling his daughter for advice, but it was late on the East Coast. Instead, he found himself thinking about all the interviews he'd given over the years, all the times he'd performed versions of himself for cameras and audiences. This would be different. This would require him to be more honest than he'd ever been in public. The memorial service was held in the hospital's chapel. A quiet space filled with flowers and photographs of children who had fought their own battles with tiger hearts. Charlie had expected a formal podium, a traditional speaking setup. Instead, he found himself sitting in a circle with 30 parents, grandparents, and siblings, all of whom had lost someone precious to childhood cancer. When his turn came to speak, Charlie looked around the circle at faces marked by grief, but also by something else, a kind of fierce love that reminded him of Sarah's letter. He abandoned his prepared speech entirely. "I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone publicly," he began, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "About 2 years ago, your daughter Sarah sent me a letter that changed my life." He told them the whole story. About reading her words over and over, about the phone call with his daughter, about the moment those words came out of his mouth in that interview. He talked about the guilt he'd felt as tiger blood became a joke, and about the foundation he'd started in Sarah's honor. When he finished, the room was silent except for the sound of Sarah's mother crying, not with sadness, but with a kind of overwhelming joy. "She knew," Sarah's mother said through her tears. "Somehow she knew that her words mattered, that they reached you. The last week of her life, she kept telling us that she had given a famous person the courage to be strong. We thought it was the medication making her confused, but she knew." After the memorial, something unexpected happened. Sarah's father approached Charlie with a request that would test everything he thought he understood about privacy and public vulnerability. "We want you to tell Sarah's story," he said. "Not just to our family and friends, but to the world. She would want other kids to know that their strength matters, that it can inspire adults, that their lives have impact even when they're fighting for them." Charlie felt torn. Sharing Sarah's story publicly would mean exposing the most sacred part of his tiger blood experience. It would mean opening himself up to potential criticism from those who might think he was exploiting a child's death for sympathy. But it would also mean honoring a brave girl's legacy in a way that might help other families. He asked for time to think about it. And that's when something happened that convinced him to take the risk. A week after returning home, Charlie received a package with no return address. Inside was a small notebook filled with drawings and stories from pediatric cancer patients at hospitals around the country. Each page was signed with a different child's name, and each one referenced tiger blood or tiger hearts or tiger courage. "Dear Tiger Blood Man," wrote an 8-year-old named Miguel. "My doctor told me about you and Sarah. I have tiger blood too. It helps me be brave for my shots. I drew you a picture of my tiger heart," wrote a 10-year-old named Emma, including a colorful drawing of a tiger with a huge red heart in its chest. Sarah was right. We are all tigers. Page after page revealed that Sarah's story had already begun spreading through the childhood cancer community, shared by doctors and nurses who had been moved by Charlie's words at the memorial service. These children were already finding strength in the idea that their courage could inspire others. Just as Sarah's courage had inspired Charlie, that's when Charlie knew he had to share the complete truth. He started with a single social media post, just a photo of Sarah's original letter with her family's permission, along with a simple caption, "This brave girl taught me what tiger blood really means. Her strength saved my life. I hope her story can inspire yours too." The response was immediate and overwhelming, but not in the way Charlie had feared. Instead of mockery or accusations of exploitation, he was flooded with messages from parents of sick children, from cancer survivors, from people who had been inspired by the idea that their struggles might have meaning beyond their own experience. More importantly, children's hospitals began reaching out. They wanted Charlie to visit, not as a celebrity making a PR appearance, but as someone who understood the profound courage it takes to face each day when your body is fighting against itself. These hospital visits became the most meaningful work of Charlie's life. He would sit with kids receiving treatment, sharing stories about tiger hearts and tiger courage, listening to their own tales of bravery that put his adult problems into perspective. One afternoon, while visiting a children's hospital in Chicago, Charlie met a 7-year-old named David who was preparing for a bone marrow transplant. David's parents were terrified, but David seemed remarkably calm. "Are you scared?" Charlie asked him. "A little," David admitted. "But my tiger blood will help me. And if something happens to me, Maybe my tiger blood will help someone else be strong too. Like Sarah's did for you. In that moment, Charlie understood that Sarah's legacy had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined. Her words had created a ripple effect of courage that was touching lives in ways that couldn't be measured or counted. The tiger blood phenomenon took on an entirely new meaning. What had started as an interview soundbite had become a symbol of pediatric courage, a rallying cry for families facing impossible odds, and a reminder that our most vulnerable moments often contain our greatest strength. Charlie established the Sarah's Tiger Heart Foundation, dedicating it not just to funding cancer research, but to supporting programs that helped sick children see themselves as heroes in their own stories. The foundation created tiger blood t-shirts for young patients, funded tiger-themed therapy programs, and sponsored research into how positive self-image affects treatment outcomes. But perhaps most importantly, Charlie had learned something about the nature of strength itself. Real courage, he realized, wasn't about pretending to be invulnerable. It was about being vulnerable in service of something larger than yourself. Sarah had been vulnerable enough to write a letter to a stranger. Charlie had been vulnerable enough to let her change him. And together, their vulnerability had created something powerful enough to inspire countless others. Years later, when people would ask Charlie about his tiger blood comment, he would sometimes tell them about Sarah, not every time and not to every interviewer. But when he sensed that the person asking might need to hear about the profound impact one brave child could have on the world. The truth about tiger blood, he would say, is that it's not about being fearless. It's about finding the courage to keep fighting, even when you're scared, and inspiring others to do the same. A 12-year-old girl taught me that, and I'll be grateful for the lesson for the rest of my life. Charlie's relationship with fame changed after Sarah's story went public. He became more selective about his projects, more intentional about his public appearances, more aware of the responsibility that comes with having a platform. Not because he felt obligated to be perfect, but because he had learned that authenticity, even messy, complicated authenticity, could be a gift to others who were struggling. The tiger blood catchphrase lived on in popular culture. But for those who knew the real story, it represented something deeper. It became a reminder that our most meaningful connections often happen in unexpected ways, that courage can be contagious, and that sometimes our darkest moments can become the source of our greatest light. Charlie Sheen's tiger blood comment would forever be remembered as one of the most memorable quotes in entertainment history. But for Charlie, it would always be remembered as the day a dying child's wisdom helped him understand what it truly means to be strong. Not for yourself, but for others who need to believe that strength is possible. And that, he knew, was the most important truth he'd ever learned to keep sacred.